Okay, and welcome everybody to At the Gardens. We apologize. We had to figure out some technological difficulties. Obviously, technology is great until it's not. I'm Garrett Wilhelm, CEO of Creative Gardens Early Education in Virginia, founder of both Creative Gardens and the Ohana School, which opens in South Riding and Aldi in December. If everything goes right, keep your fingers crossed. I'm really excited today as we have kind of gone on this journey of talking with parents about the different school options that we have for the fall. Today, I reached out on LinkedIn to say, who would like to, if anybody would like to jump on my show to talk a little bit about their situation. And today's guest was right on that. Her name is Guadalupe Tassara, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about her situation, and hopefully, given my experience, I can provide some kind of value to her, and I can't wait to have this conversation. So we're going to go ahead and get it started now. Let's bring her on the stream. All right. Hello. And hello, Guadalupe. How are you? Do you go by your full name? Is there any nicknames that you go by?
Guada usually gets cut off.
Guada, I love it. Nobody can say any name full-fledged. Like, everybody calls me G. I'm like, Garrett's cool. I'm cool with Garrett.
I go by G also. There you go.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And Guadalupe has some connection with me. I went to school with her brother and sister-in-law. I was actually better friends with her sister-in-law, Kendra, who I have known for many years. And it's exciting to talk with you about your situation and kind of your concerns and worries about what's going on for this year in Fairfax County and Loudoun County in general, the two kind of closest counties to where we're coming from in Ashburn Village. So from our previous conversation, we talked a little bit about your son, who I won't, unless you're comfortable, we'll call him nameless, but he is from how old is he? 5, correct?
5, yep.
Yeah, and so looking at all of the options, you had mentioned to me that you weren't really satisfied with what they're offering. Can we talk a little bit more? Can you explain your situation a little bit with your son and why you're kind of looking for alternative options?
Sure. Well, Max, said his name. He's 5, and he's due to start kindergarten. And of course, nobody was planning on this new way of life and new system that we have to. We don't really have many choices, and what we're being offered with virtual, while I appreciate what the county and administrators are trying to put together, it makes it very challenging for 2 working parents, to be involved in their child's education and help them along. The time frame of 9 to 3. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the idea. We're not crazy about the idea of he being in front of a computer, all day. Like, he's going to do that for probably the rest of his life. So starting at 5 years old is a little scary to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we, even though school hasn't started, he has been active. Like, we're actually doing karate online. We're doing Japanese classes online. We're doing coding online. So he's familiar with, Zoom, unfortunately, and knows how to share his screen and do all that stuff.
For sure.
But we're trying to see how we can incorporate something a little more creative that doesn't put him in front of a computer for such a fixed amount of time. And also allows us a little more flexibility with our schedule, for working.
Yeah, I think that first of all, it's your story is, if somebody 2 years ago were to hear like any of this, they'd be like, "That's the craziest thing!" Like, to have your kiddo in front of a screen all day long. And in fact, there's a lot of science around that, especially in the first 6 years of a child's life, how the effects of the blue light and things like that have on their brains and their development. Like, we know certain things for a fact, yet we're kind of posed with no other choice given the current situation. And I think what you call out is something that we don't talk about a lot. How you doing? Something that we don't talk. Hey, who's this?
This is Max's dad and my husband, Antonio.
Nice to meet you, Antonio. I'm Garrett. It's a pleasure, and welcome to At the Gardens. You're on my my Facebook Live show talking a little bit about your situation, and hopefully I can help. And so anyway, you know, I think what you had said, Guadalupe, was what kind of points out the biggest issue is we talk about school in a lot of different ways, but the thing that we don't talk a lot about is the fact that school provides a service in childcare for us to be able to go to our everyday jobs, even if they're virtual, right? Like, like in a lot of people's situations, they were working at home already, but that doesn't account for the fact that you have to actually integrate yourself into your child's education when you trusted and paid for with tax dollars teachers to do that job for you and should be doing that job for you. These are specialists that you know should be delivering a great education to your kiddo. So I think it's an interesting thing to really talk about, an interesting time that we're all in, and your pursuit for something that's not staring at a screen all day, I think, is shared by a lot of people. And so you had said that you got your kiddo into some Zoom classes and things like that. Talk to me a little bit about how that's gone.
I mean, in the beginning, it was obviously a challenge, and Antonio has taken sort of the forefront of being more sort of readily available and next to him because he has more flexibility. But, you know, we started that probably, I'd say, in about April. So our 5-year-old son now knows how to go to Antonio's email, get the link, you know, go to Zoom and, like, you know, do all that, which is, you know, great, and he's learning some things. But as I said, the biggest concern is that, you know, as we've scheduled these Zoom activities, they are spread throughout the day. So he can have like a 2 or 3 hour break where, you know, maybe we're getting outside or we're baking or we're doing something else. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge or the biggest concern I have.
Yeah, I was going to say that sentence had a lot of wheeze in it when you need to be working. And I think that's kind of the biggest challenge is during this whole time is that, you know, I don't see between Fairfax County, between Loudoun County, any information around other than they are saying, which also doesn't make sense, that Fairfax County is going to start offering childcare within the schools for families. And you're like, how does that at all make sense? But and maybe they're doing it numbers wise, playing a numbers game with ratios and things. But you know, I think the key piece that's missing with these Zoom experiences for kids is not just, you know, I think in general, my background is all in progressive education. So working to create school models that speak to a learner and how they learn individually. And I think the public school system has this memorization regurgitation model where they're kind of forced to just kind of push out what they just learned and then check a box and then move on. And I think the savior to that was great educators connecting with kids on the ground, face to face. And now that you take that aspect away, that connection piece, I think kids are going to have a really tough time staying engaged, which is the key to motivated education. And I think overall, there's got to be a solution past what has been offered. And let me ask you this: when Fairfax County offered the 2-day and then the rest of the time virtual, what choice did you make there, if you don't mind me asking?
We actually, you know, chose the virtual because of our discomfort with, you know, with the COVID situation. I think I mentioned, you know, myself and Max have autoimmunity issues that were a challenge. And so I just didn't know how that would work, not to mention, you know, what were we supposed to do the other 2-3 days of the week, at least with the virtual option. It was more days that we were offered a service, if you will. So we always kind of went with that option.
Would you guys?
None of them are good.
None of them are good, right? And what's interesting to me is like, given this certain situation, it's put a lot of light on virtual learning scenarios and, you know, and a lot of, technology on the back end. My career, again, was kind of working in progressive models. I worked a lot out in Silicon Valley with a couple of really great education companies and kind of seeing where the future of education is going, right? And then also seeing the walls in which our federal government puts up to block that. Because the government doesn't really like change that much. But it's interesting to me because this has forced a look at those types of models. So like the virtual learning, things like that is something that I'm kind of old hat at. Would you guys consider, right? Like let's say with Fairfax County, would you guys consider pulling completely and going to a separate kind of curriculum? Because there's a lot of companies that I can recommend. I have one kind of specifically that I'm thinking about that would work really well for your son, in my opinion. And it would be pretty much all day, but that all day would be up to you to schedule, right? Is you would have your content, you would have your curriculum, that would be curated, but when you get that done is entirely up to you. Would that be something that you would potentially be interested in beyond just what Fairfax County's offering?
That's why we're here.
Got it. Got it.
Like, because we are trying to basically reshape our meaning Antonio and my schedule to make it work around Fairfax County's proposition of how this could work. And while we do have work time flexibility, I think it's also going to create a really unhealthy balance because, when do we get family time for the three of us being together, right? If one of us has to take off work hours during the day and then they have to work in the evening, so then that means that we're sort of shifting, then, it's like it just creates this really chaotic situation where if we were able to schedule it more around our time so that it can work for us as a family and not just, sort of the collective Fairfax County, right? I mean, I understand why they're offering what they're offering. I just don't think it works very well for us.
Well, yeah, and I agree. And I think I always relate it back to small businesses like mine. Like we're open. We have kids in the building. We're doing a support program for virtual learners next year called the GAP program, where we have certified educators in-house with groups of 10. And we kind of work with the kids to ensure that they get their work done. But we can only do that because we have the manageable numbers in order to do so, right? Like it's a small scale. I have groups of 10 and I can clean that room like crazy all the time because I only have 10,000 square feet at this school. So when you're talking about, there's the dude, when you're talking about a mass scale school, it's very difficult to implement those measures. So you talk a lot about, for me, I'm kind of on the side of, for public school, don't open until it absolutely can be completely open, right? Like keep kids in this kind of schedule. Don't kind of force the opening because of quote unquote politics, things like that, because that's safe, right? And that's data driven. But the specific program that I'm thinking about, and I'll send you all guys, I'll follow up with you guys after all of this and send you all the information. There is a company called Altitude Learning that was formerly called Alt School. And I worked with them deeply in the very beginning of their building of a platform that allows for exactly what I'm talking about, which is you have curated educators that build curriculum and content into a platform, and that content is kind of a best practices of Montessori and Reggio Emilia and Common Core and all these different approaches to learning. My background's all in Montessori education because I like that independent driven education. But what that would look like for you is your child would have a day that really spoke to kind of their schedule and your schedule really. And then you would kind of check in with this platform. Max would have what's called a playlist, and in his playlist he would have different cards. And if anybody's in a tech field and kind of like Trello or Asana or anything like that, these different project management apps, it works like a project management app for kids, right? Where you have these playlist cards. These cards then have content on them. That content, the child could be watching a video. They could be watching a video shot by their teacher. It could be a live Zoom call that they're jumping in on to have a discussion or group lesson. And then again, the follow-up is all based upon your schedule, your timing, because in my mind, as a progressive educator in this business for a long time, like that's how education should be anyway, right? Is education should be driven by the learner to really speak to their learning style and the way they learn. Like I can probably guarantee you that you and Antonio would approach a problem differently, yet you would come to the same or somewhat similar solution, but how you got there doesn't really like that should be how you're old enough now to know that that's how you get to the answers to problems, right? And I think if kids were more self-aware about that earlier, it's much more of a strength. We don't need rote memorization. I have Google, I have Siri, I have all of these different tools that are not going away. What we need is for kids to start understanding how they learn, right? And being able to iterate upon that. Nerdy educators call it metacognition, but you really want to be able to be thinking about how you think. And that's, a platform like that. And again, I'll send you a bunch of different options, but the options are out there, and they're out there with companies that really know what they're doing. I think for you as parents that are new to this, it's really hard to disseminate between what is just crap that somebody threw together 3 months ago because they wanted to opportunize on the situation, or is it well developed, and really sitting behind good intentions. And I think that's why I kind of lean towards the altitude learning and specifically called altitude learning at home. My kids did a trial run on it at the beginning of this quarantine, just to kind of test things out as because I'm friends with all the guys over there. So they kind of gave me it, and it was brilliant. They follow up. They make sure that, you have the ability to be extremely involved. You have an app on your phone called Stream that you kind of watch what your kiddo's doing. So if your kiddo turns in work or anything like that, you see that work could be, let's say your child has to figure out a problem in math. They could do that and display that work visually, whether they're writing it on paper, there's counters involved or whatever it may be. You can document, they teach the kiddo to document their own evidence of learning, right? So he would document his result, and then he could send that into the teacher's inbox, and it creates this kind of flow of work and assessment that makes much more sense than the little amount of time that educators can spend in a public school environment on actually making sure your child understands what they're learning, which I think is so important, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I have some questions about that.
Sure.
The first one is, I mentioned a few classes that Max has been taking that he's really sort of grown to love and have become part of what he's doing. I mean, we started with karate, which led to him learning how to count in Japanese, which was now like, oh, well, let's throw Japanese in the mix. And so now he has, a teacher that he's 5 years old, and, we are bilingual. So now we're trying to do trilingual. So, could we incorporate classes that we are already a part of into this platform, the Japanese, the coding, karate, can that be like the physical aspect of it, or is it that they give us a curriculum and we have to choose from sort of their bucket of choices?
So that's a great question. I think the interesting part about this company, I don't want to speak for them, but what I would say is that my experience with them, which has been deep and long term, is that it's very custom to what you need, right? And the way that things are structured within the learning environment, or what's called the LMS, the learning management system, is very attuned to that. So like, let's say you have your ballet class, or I'm sorry, your karate class, or whatever it may be. That's just a chunk of time, right? For the same reason we can throw that up on a schedule and we know that that's there. It's very similar to that. So it's much more about, you have this kind of curated content. You have offerings when it comes to small group, individual, and large group lessons, but it really comes down to for this coming year, it's about, knowing what the Virginia standards of learning are, knowing that that's where you kind of have to start to create what's a shared language between what you're doing this year and public school for whenever they reintegrate back into school. Or you guys may make the choice of like, wow, this is too good. Like, we might just keep this going. Who knows?
Right.
But I think that would definitely be a possibility and option.
Okay. Yeah, because that you kind of touched on my next question, which was, right now we're sort of thinking about this for this year, right? This coming school year. What happens if we want to shift gears? Is there like a package that we're given if we wanted to go back to Fairfax County if schools reopen? Then I know you have to sort of submit something to the county of like, this is what we've been doing. Is that like a package that?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit. Yes, first of all is, the reintegration and that shared language that you create through the same ping points that Virginia uses. Like for me, like, let me give you an example here. Like at my school here, we're doing this GAP program, right? And then we have an early education side of things. So I have infants all the way through to 5-year-olds here. And the way we structure our education, COVID or not, is we have the Virginia standards of learning as our base, right? To say, when these kids transition back into school, we're working off the same stuff. Now, I think this is important for both situations, whether it be a fully virtual online learning like the companies I suggested, or something in-house. If you allow children to reach those competencies in their own ways that are comfortable for them, and then support that with evidence, all of a sudden it becomes far more meaningful education than anything that you could possibly imagine. So my point in saying that is, you would have a reporting, and I just speak to kind of the learning model that we've kind of all designed, which is, you have the learning standards that Fairfax County still works off of, because they work off of Virginia Department of Learning Standards that are all in a cadence. So each school has a very similar cadence to how these are taught, or when they're taught. I'm sorry. You can say, like, even in the first 3 months, like, let's say it lasts 1 quarter and we magically can go back to school in January. When the kids re-enter, not only do you have that these kids have been properly assessed in the learning standards, but you also have evidence to prove the pudding. So rather than saying, because there's a lot of subjectivity in education, right? There's an educator that says they know this, which is a subjective opinion, right? And then you have the Virginia VSOLs, the Virginia Standards of Learning tests, that don't factor in social emotional anything. Like, the kid could have a rough day, could have been tired, didn't sleep. Parents could be getting divorced. Dad could be abusive. There's a million different things that factor into a child's education. When you look at a method beyond that in saying, if we can support these learning standards with evidence that speaks to the child, right? Like a child that maybe does a PBL or project-based learning activity for a week with the theme of robots, and creates a robot in their head that does X, Y, or Z, and then relays that to families in a presentation where they're drawing the robot with crayon and explaining it. There's a lot of learning that went on with that, and that child feels so much more confident displaying their learning in a method to which speaks to them and their learning style, rather than saying, okay, Guadalupe, Antonio, sit down at this test, fill in these Scantron bubbles, and then that'll be how I quantify your success. So I think that was a long answer, but I think to go back to it, it's much more in these different ulterior methods that I'm explaining. And I'll have more options for you beyond just altitude learning, but all along the same line. These companies know that they're going to have to reintegrate at some point back into school, and knowing that they have to kind of use that baseline standard of Virginia Department or whatever state you're in. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, and that was the last of the question. Is, as I mentioned to you, we are in kind of a unique situation where we are on our way back to the States, but we're not there yet. And so it might be the case that we need to start off virtual, just because of our physical location, but that doesn't mean that the intent is not to be back, in the Northern Virginia area. So the other thought, or need that we have is, can we have something that's offered that gives us the support we need? Because obviously we didn't choose to be in this situation, but we are. And that has been a bit of a challenge with Fairfax County. And so having a place that really supports our unique situation is very important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in any type of situation that's alternative to public schooling, and especially a virtual scenario, a lot of like, let's say you would go with altitude learning, you would have an educator assigned to a certain number of students in the same grade level, kind of managing these different standards. And the technology is great for that, like all of that stuff. But that would be your kind of support system. And then, just knowing that, I mean, you have my card in the bank. Like if you guys have any questions, like, or any struggles or anything like that, this is something we do. And if the rubber hits the road and you guys are like, none of this is working, we need something in person. Like I don't know how far I would be down the road from you guys, but there are other programs that are doing this too. I think the difference in what we're doing here is a lot of people are like, martial arts studios are saying, we're going to monitor your kids doing work, but that doesn't ensure that your child actually understands what they're learning. And so that's why we have certified teachers that are trained, that are going to be employees with me beyond this, GAP program. So they're trained in the Yoda Jedi ways of personalized education. And I think that's the biggest difference that we're doing. And I know of some other schools in the kind of Fairfax County area, the Alexandria area, things like that, that are doing very similar things. So again, if you get down to the point where you're like, this isn't working for Max, he's more of a hands-on learner, needs to be in the environment. And, I think the reason we're able to do it now, mind you, if he has autoimmune issues, then obviously he's probably going to be more delayed than a lot of the other kiddos kind of going back to ensure safety when it comes to that. So there's a lot of options, but no, I think it's really important for you guys to know that like there's really refined kind of options that are out there. It all, of course, comes down to things like price range and budget, and obviously you got to pay to play in these types of scenarios, and that's just a really interesting thing. And a quick question for you guys, an opinion-based question is, one, ask yourself, is Fairfax County spending the same amount of money that they would be spending if children were in school, right? Two, where, if so, there's a surplus, where is that money going? And three, do you feel like that money could be put towards supplementing programs for parents, giving that money back? It's a big question. I apologize.
It is, and honestly, I have no idea, about the comparison of sort of, dollar to dollar of now versus, last year's school year. I imagine that they're not, but like I know if we wanted the choice, we are given a laptop, so that's. And every student at the elementary school that we are assigned to is given a laptop. So I do think that they are considering and they are providing as much as possible. So I don't know if there was money left over. I mean, one thing that we have sort of joked around about is in a lot of Latin American countries, the way that the school systems work, most of them are private, right? And then for the elementary school years, you have the option of going to school in the morning or in the afternoon. And so even given an option like that, where it could help organize our time, where maybe, Max could be going to school in the afternoon. And so one of us could be working and not have, knowing that the school day is going on later on. And then we switch. Like, there's just not a lot of flexibility in those choices. And so I think something like that could potentially work. And does that mean, if that's, it is a dollar question, because it's paying, the people, the administration, to be available at certain times, and
that's exactly right.
And most people do want to work 9 to 5, but maybe that's not realistic these days. So I think if there are extra dollars, I would throw it at being creative and trying to solve, these kinds of problems.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good call out. And I think that that's a great suggestion. It's interesting because, I would consider yourselves lucky in some ways that you're not bad. I mean, because here it's sadly, right? I don't care about your political views, like in some sense, but it's all become that, right? It's like, it's all of those decisions are based and rooted in how do we get X, Y, or Z elected, and I think that's a detriment to our kids, and I think that's something that we really. I'm a dad of 5, and like I just think that our kids need some consistency, even if it's at home, even if it's for the entire year, but to play this game of virtue signaling of what we think is going to get, X, Y, or Z elected, or how we're going to get more money for X, Y, and Z is really delaying a response like what you're talking about, which is, hey, we've ripped childcare from millions of families. What are we going to do to alleviate some of those pains?
Right.
And there's just been zero response. So people have, I mean, I know parents that last year were like, I'm not doing this virtual thing. My kids are skipping this time. You know what I mean? If it doesn't count, then I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And who knows? Like, I can only imagine that that's going to happen again, when we get back to school. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, it's almost like the parents are forced to think outside the box and rethink their day. So I think that should be across the board. I mean, I was even thinking about, if I was a teacher, right? And how am I supposed to be teaching and online while my kid is maybe in the other room needing me for instruction?
And that is the case with many people. That's the case with many people.
Right. So I think it's just we're being forced to make a decision that is for the convenience of the administrators, but not for the convenience of the families. So I want to ask you, because I tried to do a little bit of research and I couldn't find much, but the Ohana School that you mentioned that you're opening, can you tell me about that? And is it related? I saw it had like a Hawaiian flair. And I did, I'm blanking, but I did we listened to a virtual concert by Jack Johnson, organized it in Hawaii. I think it was called the Kokana Foundation. And you mentioned that this would be in Aldi. And so I was curious if there's any similarities between.
So it's so weird, right? So there's, Ohana School, I've been in education a long time, and I've been an entrepreneur now for probably the past 15 years. And the reason why I jumped into my first school was because I started really even in a Montessori school, I was like, why are we saying that this is the only way? Like, what? Like, there's so many different really awesome approaches to learning that have so much value. It's really the learner that learns differently. So we have to really, great educators, in my opinion, absorb as much as they can as an influence by osmosis and being there and professional development and really all of those things, so that they're building this large toolkit to serve the child. And so I started getting this idea in my head to start a school centered around that. And so we started my first school, Berthold Academy in Reston. And that's where we kind of made this really kind of fundamental partnership with an ed tech company called Alt School that I recommended, but they are funded by Zuckerberg and Peter Thiel and Bill and Melinda Gates. It's all the big wigs going, who's really got the smartest people to create the best way of learning to really set us up for success, because we're behind in every country when it comes to our education system. So that kind of started that path, but that was with older kids. And so I had always thought, when you have a transformative mind, a mind that's making very permanent connections, specifically around executive functioning, planning, personality, things like that, like, how can we take these same ideas of empowering educators to have amazing toolkits for education, amazing professional development, great experiences there? How can we take that into the early learning space to inspire kids to really have self-awareness and learn in a way that speaks to their learning style? And it was kind of delayed. I worked for a nonprofit. I turned them around as executive director in Reston called Common Ground, and did a lot of work there and made a lot of success there as well. But I kept getting this itch, right? I've had the idea of the school, the Ohana School, for probably 13, 14 years in my brain, and it's kind of adapted over time. So I surf. I am very kind of in touch with the connectivity of all living things, which is what Ohana means. Like Ohana in Hawaii, it not only means family, but it means this kind of unspoken connection between everything. And that's where I felt education was lacking was, we factor in what we think a child should be learning, right? And we factor in what a typically developing child should be good at. But what we don't factor in is all of those really gray areas, who is this child as a learner? Yes, this child potentially could have ADHD, but who else has ADHD is, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and, all of these people that are transformative in the world. Why can't we guide kids to start understanding that one of the biggest powers in the world is self-awareness, and another one is empathy, and another one is kindness and compassion? Let's start a school that centers around those tenets. And that's where Ohana came from. And Jack Johnson, all that stuff, of course, that's all the stuff I listened to growing up and still even currently. But for me, the school, it's so cool. I can't wait to start, because the project has just been a little background really quick is I had the ability and magic. I don't even know how it happened. I kind of closed my eyes and but I partnered with Gymboree. So my business, the Ohana School LLC, is in partnership with Gymboree, who makes kids clothes and play and learn setters and all of this great stuff. So there's great money behind the idea now. And so initially I was going to open the Ohana School under an SBA loan pre-COVID, was kind of getting all that going, ready to roll, ready to rock. And that's when this kind of partnership started happening. I started talking with Gymboree, and I told them no 500 times. And then finally they made a deal that made sense to me. But the point of me mentioning that is the goal is to start creating and scaling schools that focus in on the things that are important, which is community, which is social emotional growth and goals, and how to quantify success there, and then educating kids in a way that speaks to their learning style, and empowering a community to be better humans just for the sake of being better humans. And so the Ohana School is a micro school. It's 40 to 50 kids in the school. Most schools, especially at an early education level, including Creative Gardens where I'm at, 160 kids, 180 kids. There's a personalized attention you can give there, but not as personalized as when you have 40 or 50 kids with 40 or different 50 families. You can cover all the small details. You can sweat the small stuff in that kind of environment. And we're plugging them into retail spaces. So you have a Reston Town Center, for instance. You have imagine being creative, using shared outdoor spaces, things like that. Imagine having a community hub, which don't exist anymore. You have churches and schools. You don't have the lodge. You don't have the social clubs like you used to. You have churches and schools that really push community. And I think for me, if we can plop a micro school into all of these different live, work, play communities, like Reston Town Center, like Brambleton Town Center, all these different town center areas that have residential, they have retail, you can all of a sudden create an example, right, in our community of what's important. Because I think we're very lost as a society, especially Americans, in what is important for education,
Oh, you froze there.
So what'd you get?
Yeah, I got most of that when you were talking about the physical location. But then froze there at the end. I'm so excited about what you just said. That sounds amazing to me. We definitely want more information. about that? And just to clarify, so do you have a physical location that you're going to be like opening or hoping to open in December or January of this year in Albany?
Yeah, exactly. COVID is a funny thing. It has slowed down supply chains. It has slowed down a lot of different stuff. So my hope is that we can get it open in December. We do have a location. We're finalizing lease terms with that location. As soon as we're final on that, I can announce that location. But it's in this wonderful little area where Aldi meets South Riding, and it's on a major road, but offset off the major road, and it's perfect. It's got everything that you would need to run an awesome school. And I think the cool thing is I talk a lot about the prepared environment, just in general, and how important that is. And I'm excited to bring a lot of the inspiration that I've got in my travels and a lot of inspiration that I've seen in other classrooms into this school. I call the motif Scandinavian Hawaiian. So you have this like very kind of surfy but classy feel, but very modern. Everything's purposeful. You have purposeful stuff, purposeful materials, purposeful furniture. Even at our school here, we have living plants all over the place. We have a garden out back, a sustainable garden. So that fuels some of the food in our food program. We plan on doing the same for Ohana as well. So again, kind of scaling these practices that teach people without religion, without kind of a deity to ping back on, in saying this we should be doing these things because, one, it's good for the human race to be good people and to choose kindness. But two, these are sustainability actions that kids will embed in themselves as we move forward in the future, where we have a government right now that denies climate change. And we know these things are coming, right? I'm just trying to do my part through what I'm good at to kind of boost the community and society and give them somewhat of a path, some direction, if that makes sense.
Well, I know that we talked about 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and all of the stuff you're telling me right now, I could talk to you for like 5 more hours, I think.
Well, we'll have to schedule some time. Yeah. Maybe I can help you guys further.
It sounds really exciting. We definitely want to hear more about it. I mean,
I think it goes back, we're both architects. I don't know if she what I mentioned, but it also goes back in the idea of, building environments of what you mentioned, for kids to be responsible, sustainable, emotionally, but also socially. I think those are big parts of what we believe in also as architects.
Right. That's what we do in our day-to-day sort of professional work, and we try to teach our son these things. And so being a part of a community where that exists just sounds so amazing, because it has been a challenge to integrate ourselves into that community. We're sort of actively looking for that, if you will. So that it sounds dreamy, honestly.
It's funny. Like-minded people are very much attracted to kind of and I've had to, on the back end, be in building this business, if you can imagine, convince people that this is what society really needs and wants in a school. I think we're done in general, most of us, right? And especially after this really hard time, I feel like I'm a positive guy, so I feel like a lot of the hardships we're going through is raising the overall consciousness of the world and understand. And you're seeing that, right? You're seeing stuff in Black Lives Matter come up and front-faced and in people's faces. I think in that kind of raise of consciousness, we seek an environment, like you're saying, that speaks to the community that is involved in it. I talk a lot about an iteration of a school, right? Like, I don't want to be in a school that says we have it all down. This is how we do things. I want to be in a school where we're having a ton of meaningful conversations with folks like you, understanding what the community wants and needs, and giving the community and quote unquote market what it wants. I mean, it's simple stuff. And I hope through, folks just like you, as we move forward, that we can really kind of affect a lot of change in general by teaching our kids at a very young age that the world is a very different place than, let's say, even the media paints it to be. that fundamentally we are good people. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. I mean, you're hitting it. One thing that we've been really focusing on lately is what are our values, right? And how are we learning and how are we making decisions based on our values, both personally, professionally, and, we're trying to teach our son to do that. I mean, we have plants that we've been growing since we've been here inside, and we were on lockdown, and it was like, all right, well, we need more green space in our apartment. So let's start growing stuff,
Yep.
and we have beans that are growing out of like recycled, water bottles,
I love it.
Yeah. So those are the things that are really important to us. And there's such a big thing. It's not just about the plant, right? It's what he's learning, about caring for the plant and
Exactly.
Going to it every day. And there's so much more to it. And for us, that is certainly really important, and just as important as his math skills or reading skills.
I argue more important, just because in my opinion, when you're looking at process driven education, which is what you're talking, it's all about that process, right? It's not just about the plant that's growing, which is cool, but it's about the empathy for understanding that living things in the world need care. And the lessons in which you as the parents can embed into those practices, you know what I mean? And it's the same reason why we do that here. To understand in general, if you want to talk about a product driven, to know that your food doesn't come from a grocery store, that they're not magically making it in the background, that there's effort involved, and a lot of effort, I think is just so important for kids. But so I think here's what we can do, Guadalupe. I will jump off this talk. And I will craft an email that gives you suggestions and all of that. And, I'm an open source for you and your husband. If you guys ever want to, just do a Zoom call privately and talk a little bit about what you guys are thinking for Max for next year, I think that's really important. I can kind of lay out all the options and give you all the details, but know that you guys making a gut feeling decision for your kiddo, in my opinion, is the best. Like the moment you start going, this isn't really working for us, that's the moment, like those decisions are really going to be the best ones for your kiddo. Yeah, no, I think I'm so happy that I decided to, I don't even remember how it was that we connected, to be honest, but whatever it was. Yeah, it was on LinkedIn. I just put a call out. I think we had connected otherwise. And we obviously have a lot of mutual friends, but what's interesting to me before we jump off is that when I'm talking to architects, I watch your faces light up when I say Scandinavian Hawaiian. You're like, oh. I studied in Denmark, what you just said is, like I said, you keep making more questions that I want to ask, and definitely we'll have to book some time to speak again, because everything you're saying sounds amazing. A lot of the projects that I've been involved with professionally have had to do with childcare. So like I know the Virginia, regulations and, all of, the building review elements of it. Yeah. So curious about your take on things. I just think we have a lot that we could talk about. Yeah, no, I think so too. Beyond, I don't know if you're working for a company or you're taking personal projects, but there's the opportunity to potentially work. I mean, I'm always looking for people that vibe with, especially when it comes to building and creating. As you guys know, that's a challenging process, and you want to make sure that you're vibing well, and like from up here to folks like you who can actually make that into something. Definitely a lot of conversations for the future, because the Ohana School is just the first, right? And we plan on going national with it. So there's a lot of different opportunities for cool schools to be built in really interesting places, because that's what I'm all about. But we'll definitely talk, guys. Thank you. I have to jump off, but thank you so much, Antonio and Guadalupe, for joining me today on At the Gardens. We really, really appreciate it. And we will definitely be in touch soon to further the conversation around Max. I wish you guys the best of luck this school year. It's just, we all are just kind of going with the flow at this point, and hopefully everything turns out well. And I hope that you guys stay safe and healthy, and that your family does as well. And thanks again so much for joining me.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing you. All right.
Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us here at the Gardens. We really appreciate your time and attention here. That was a great conversation with Guadalupe and Antonio about their situation. I hope you can relate to it in some way. And yeah, tune in next time. Actually, this Thursday, we have Elizabeth Adams on. She is the co-founder of Trussell. They are a company that is sourcing learning pods for families, which is super interesting. So I'll see you then. Have a great day. And remember to keep your head up and keep moving forward. Talk to you soon.